If you want to leave a comment on this video, here's how. Follow the link in the description to our blog and leave a comment there. All you have to do is make a fandom account and you're good to go. You can also follow the link to our tweet at TTTECradio and reply to that. We can't wait to hear your thoughts. Hello everybody, this is Rudy Productions, aka Dustin, and here with me is my guest host,
MasterOfTheLemons, aka Lemmy. Hello everyone.
and welcome to Trackplan Banter, the show where we talk about train layouts or Thomas layouts, specifically wooden railway, and everything under the sun when it comes to that topic. Today's topic is engine sheds, and before we actually get to talking about sheds themselves, the first thing we want to do is kind of talk about our own individual style of how we build layouts in general.
Yeah, I think this is going to be really interesting because I'm curious to see how we kind of, the differences in our own styles. Because from what I've seen, from what you've designed, Dustin, because I've seen a few pictures of your layouts on Twitter, we have a little bit of overlap in that. So generally what I like to do when I design a layout is I like to have kind of an outside oval to it.
Right.
That's usually like double track. And then I kind of fill in the middle with other stuff. Like I'll put in like a few sidings that like jut into the middle that have like, work sheds or whatever. I've got like, but generally I like to have like kind of a main line that kind of surrounds the edges of it, and usually I like to have a lot of straights too. Like I like to have like, when I say oval, I don't mean like an oval that just
like
has,
a squared oval. More like a rectangle.
Yeah, like a squared oval. Yeah, it's like basically like this rectangular frame that kind of frames in the whole layout, and then I kind of build inward and add stuff on the inside. So that way I have a lot of kind of nice, long, straight, tracks that are double track for like the express to run along, goods trains, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I know I've definitely done a lot similar. I've had a few layouts where it was maybe not like an oval or rectangle or really any specific shape, but I had like a two-way main line that kind of ran in a full circuit with a whole bunch of branches and industries kind of running off the side and through the middle. But my main focus is what I call the pseudo-realistic sort of layout, where it operates like your typical wooden railway layout, where it's more like a web than a point-to-point railway. But you can still, to a typical person, it just looks like a train layout. But to a Thomas fan, you can see like, oh, here's the line that runs from Tidmouth to Knapford, from Knapford to Crosby to Wellsworth to Marin on till Vickerstown.
Yeah. I like to have some kind of general semblance of kind of what stuff is meant to represent. Like when I sit down and make a layout, I know this isn't true of a lot of people, but when I sit down and make a layout, I kind of think like, okay, where kind of is this?
Right.
And it's not going to like look particularly that much like the place, but like say I want to think about like, is this like Brendam to Sudbury? Is this like a general kind of Tidmouth layout? Is this like Barrow? Like where is this, right? And I kind of have general, I have little details throughout that kind of make sense for it. And also when I, sit down to actually place the engines, I'll probably, like if it's a mainline kind of layout, I'll put on engines like Gordon, Henry, James, Boco. And, if it's like like Thomas's branch, I'll put on Thomas, Percy, Toby, Mavis, etc. So I have a general kind of idea of the theme of the layout, like, where
now,
it is.
often my theme is just like the island of Sodor in a very stylized manner. Which I do want to put like a lot of emphasis on that. Like it's very stylized. Like I know there are sometimes I put Brendam on the main line because that's what the TV series sometimes depicts.
Yeah, honestly, I feel like if you did like a TV series map just based on, not based on any map that came before, but just based on what you see on screen, you'd probably put Brendam in like the middle of the main line because like it's like a stop for the express. Which is weird because it's an express. Why is it stopping? But yeah, so I would say.
Well,
that
if
that
there were
makes
like
sense in
three
some context.
places where the TV series Express would stop, I would I would say that, probably like Knapford, Brendam, and then Vickerstown, and then
Yeah, in the railway series, it's Tidmouth, Crovan's Gate, and Barrow. So
right.
it's got 3 there too.
Yeah.
So not the most far fetched
Yeah.
thing.
So yeah, I when I do build a layout, I like to make it feel like it's an actual railway. So I like having like a goods yard and stuff like that. But I also like to have just kind of fun with stuff like where it's not really realistic, but at the same time it's a nice little fun layout. Like this the stacking risers and having tracks stacked on top of each other and stuff like that. Something you wouldn't see on a normal railway, but it's still a fun layout.
Yeah, that's I think probably the only place we diverge is like I don't think if I ever add a second level to a layout, it's meant to represent like hills or something.
Right.
Like it's it's usually like I wouldn't go. The only time I'd have track go over track is maybe if I was doing like a
narrow gauge
series
railway or
Knapford.
something like that.
Well, more like a railway series. Knapford,
Oh yeah.
because that's the only place on the island I can think of besides. I guess there is one part of the Culdee Fell Railway that crosses over the Peel Godred branch, but there's like very, very few places where track crosses over track. And for me, it's like, even though the proportions of the layout are obviously very simplified, and obviously it's not going to be a full circuit on a real railway, generally I don't like to include things like include concepts that don't really follow on a real railway, just because that's how I like to
again,
go
me,
personally.
I go general, like, of course, Knapford and Tidmouth, like, have to be on, or not Knapford and Tidmouth, like, Knapford Station and Vickerstown Station have to be on, like, opposite sides of the layout. But at the same time, I don't always follow to the map, just, I kind of generally do, in kind of just the broad sense.
Yeah, it's a lot more symbolic.
Yeah. Which is kind of how layouts are kind of meant to work. I just make it work a little bit more realistically than your typical wooden railway layout. But with that little tidbit out of the way, let's go into talking about the sheds themselves, which the reason this is the first episode is because the sheds are like the most important location on Sodor, next to Knapford.
I think a lot of people... honestly, a lot of people start with like the roundhouse and build around it. I think that's kind of a common building technique. And it's like, and in general, they're just, sheds are something that you can like use for so many different purposes. Because it's like, I mean, like, especially like the works shed and like the special engine shed. You could use them as like kind of, like you could use them as carriage sheds, use them as like goods sheds.
Yeah.
They're really just great as like a background element on like a set or like on a, even on the layout too, where it just like they're a nice general building that you really can be used for a lot of different purposes.
Yeah. The works shed is definitely like my favorite shed by far because of all those reasons. It's very versatile. You can have it just sitting out on the main line if you want it. You can use it as a goods shed, a carriage shed, an engine shed. And of course it's just really satisfying seeing Donald and Douglas sitting in the work shed next to each other. So,
yeah, really. It makes me think of that one illustration from the beginning of the Twin Engines, where where Donald and Douglas are having their numbers painted on. Reminds me of that shed.
Right.
But like, I mean, it's really cool how. You know what I always loved about the work shed is that kind of glass roof that it has with all the little support beams on it, because that's just such a neat look for the roof of a shed.
I've always liked that. Like, I've seen people take that those roofs and actually use them for like roofs of like custom stations, where they like take poles up and like bounce it on poles.
Yeah, you couldn't you?
And like that just
because they do look a lot like glass station canopies. Yeah. They're a little bit small, but they do work.
But
pretty
and
well
since wooden railway is kind of lacking in the shed department, it just works really well. Like if you're putting up a set and you're not worrying about using the works shed, or maybe the works shed is like you're using as like a warehouse building in the background, which it's also very useful as.
You certainly could.
You can always use those glass roofs as like I wouldn't say canopies, but the word escapes me. But like kind of that like kind of overhang sort of, cover from the elements. Um, but
Yeah.
uh, but yeah, so
You
they're
could use them as, I think I know what you mean. Like they use them as like a kind of an awning for a
yes,
station too,
yes,
where you've got
awning. That was
yeah.
um. So yeah, so
And
even
also
when you're not using it
the
as a
works.
shed, the works shed is still very useful.
Yeah. Plus, like the fact that it's a through shed is really
Yeah,
helpful. You can put it in a lot more places. Because if you just want it to if you just want it to back up to a wall, you can do that. But if you want it to go through, you could do that too.
right.
Whereas the special engine shed is like more limited in that
Yeah,
regard.
like the
And
special
I do
engine
love the
shed,
special engine
if you're
shed,
not
but
using it as, a backdrop warehouse, which, I've seen tons of people do on their sets, um, you're using it as an engine shed. Like, even as a carriage shed, it doesn't exactly pull it off quite right unless you have like two or three kind of lined up next to each other. Um, in
you
my
know
opinion.
what the special engine shed reminds me of is well, firstly, if you put three like side by side, it reminds me of the Farquhar sheds.
Yeah.
But it also reminds me of, you know how Oliver has kind of his own shed in the TV
Yeah,
series where
yeah.
it's
It's just like sitting by a
like
turntable just by itself. Kind of like,
yeah,
okay.
that would be really useful.
Yeah. Yeah, it kind of would look really nice there. Um,
You know what else could kind of work? I guess the special engine shed would be better for this, but I want to bring this up is the what's the kind of the useful
yeah,
engine shed? Is that what it's
the
called?
not special engine shed, the useful engine shed. Kind of
That's
like,
an interesting
yeah,
mix. It's kind of like a mix between the special engine shed and the work shed
and then
because
with the
it's got
gimmick
like that
of
cool
the
glass
deluxe
roof.
roundhouse, where you can kind of launch an engine out of the shed.
Wait, it can do
Yeah, it
that?
can actually.
Oh, I had no
Yeah, it's
idea.
like a
That's kind
slider
of
that
neat.
like you push the engine out. But
Huh.
still,
There's probably a lot of chipped engines as a result of that.
at least I think it has that. I feel like I remember it having. If I'm wrong, we're gonna hear about it. Uh,
Yeah, no, we're gonna get it.
um,
But you know, you mentioned the deluxe roundhouse. We should talk about the roundhouse in more detail because that's an interesting
yeah.
like that's I think that. So, what's your favorite version of out of all the roundhouses we've seen in the range? What do you think is the best one?
Okay, so objectively, the best one is definitely the Mattel one, which is weird to
I would
say.
say so too. Yeah, the thing is, I just honestly though, my favorite versions of a lot of stuff come from the
Yeah.
Mattel kind of era. Like I really my favorite Gordon models, the CGI one. My favorite Henry James. Really, a lot of my favorite engines are from the Mattel era because I just think they're so nice and crisp. And the same goes for the sheds, where they're just like they've got a lot more detail. They're a lot more on point.
Yeah.
And the colors are right because like early on they
Still
had
not
this kind of
seven births,
multi-purpose.
but okay.
Yeah, but other than that, because they've got this early on in the range, they had this kind of carbon copy, side of the shed's decal, which they put on the work shed, put on the
Yeah.
special engine shed, put on the roundhouse. Whereas like here, we've got something that's actually less vague, where it's like this bright yellow with the right roof,
Yeah.
and I think that it is the best one. So if I had to choose one of these to represent the TV series Tidmouth, that's certainly what I
Yeah.
would choose. But what I grew up with was the older one that has the special engine shed decals on the
Yeah.
sides,
I
and I actually have two of those because one of them like the door broke off, and it's crazy. Like we told Learning Curve, and they sent us like a second one, like no questions asked. They're like, oh yeah, forget
Yeah.
about it. We'll
Well,
just send you
the
another
fact
one.
that they did that with
And
like an
now
item as big as the roundhouse surprises me. Like,
I know.
your spiteful brake van breaks, and like they send you a new one. Okay, all right, it's a freaking brake van. But a whole roundhouse. That's awesome. And like
Yeah.
my deluxe roundhouse, which was my roundhouse for most of my life. I also had like before that I had the interactive learning railway roundhouse, but we'll talk about that later. Um,
The deluxe roundhouse, that's the one that's like red all over,
yeah,
right?
it has a lot
Yeah,
of red,
I
and I like it, like, but I like it because it's different. you know,
The thing is, I always kind of disliked it when I would see it in pamphlets. I never owned it, but when I first saw it, I thought it was like a firehouse. Like I didn't realize it was supposed to be an
yeah.
engine shed because it's just the colors are so weird on that thing. Um,
Actually, what I like using it as is like, so I have the Deluxe Roundhouse, and then I also have the Mattel Tidmouth sheds. So what I like is that like having the Mattel Tidmouth sheds is the classic Tidmouth, and then like the Deluxe Roundhouse is like it looks more modern. So I like using it as like the diesel shed where all the diesels go.
that's a good point. Honestly, it does look a lot more. I think that's why I kind of was turned off from it because it looks too modern, looks too sleek, looks too like doesn't really look like a traditional engine shed. But it does kind of look like I could see that honestly working for like a diesel
Yeah,
works type shed.
yeah. Um, but yeah, that was the roundhouse I've had for most of my childhood. Like mine, all the doors are missing. There's not one door that's still attached to that shed. Um, which is fitting if it's the diesel shed because Day of the Diesels. Um, so,
Yeah,
and one
totally
thing
run
that
down.
I liked doing with this shed, that when me and my mom would build layouts, and it was something she pointed out, was that there's just enough of a strip on it that you can fit a stretch of track on there, and it's about like two risers high. It's like just above that. So I'd always, not always, but a lot of times when I was building layouts, that's a thing that I would do, is I'd take the track up to that level and have the trains run up there. I'd sometimes even say that like that was Tidmouth Station, just because it looked stationy enough for my, 10-year-old brain to say like, okay,
Yeah, I get what you mean.
um, this is the station. Especially since as a child, like before I got back into Thomas as a collector and you know obsessive fan, the only other station I had was the Sudbury station. Um,
Yeah. Wait. Which one is that?
so it's the Sight and Sound, or it's one of the Talking Railway series stations with
Huh.
like, yeah,
Interesting.
um,
Yeah, the thing about wooden railway stations is they're all just a lot of them miss the mark. There's not very many that actually look right,
yeah,
and so there's only like a handful that really are useful, I think. But like the sheds have a much better track record because it's like, and I think it's because it's harder to mess up a shed.
yeah.
A station has a lot of
Especially
intricacies that are
since
kind of
there's a lot of areas where you can say like, okay, there's sheds all over the island. Even if this isn't a shed that I recognize, it's very easy for one to imagine, okay, well maybe this is just a shed that I haven't seen. You know.
Yeah, exactly. It's like all stations are accounted for, so we know if one is out of place. Whereas a shed, it's like that's constantly, even within the show, it's constantly changing on sets. They're constantly swapping out sheds. It's like how in season 4 they have a totally different shed in Tidmouth Yard than they did in the other seasons, where it's like more of a generic goods
Right.
shed. In that season, it was like this big brick
Yeah.
thing. It looked totally different. So I mean, it's constantly changing. You really can take a lot of liberties when it comes to sheds and where to place them, what they're representing.
Yeah. Like in my dream layout, where like most of the areas of Sodor are accounted for, there are 5 places that I would put roundhouses, and those are, uh, in this specific order: Tidmouth, Vickerstown, Knapford, Croven's Gate, and then Brendam. Just because I feel Brendam is big enough in the
Very
TV
interesting.
series to put a roundhouse. And typically,
I think
when I
those are
build a
probably
layout,
all
I
the.
go with the bigger version of the location.
Yeah, the thing is like that's interesting because those are probably the most key areas in the TV series. I think the most iffy one honestly is Tidmouth, which is funny because in the Railway series that would be the most definite one. But like it's because Tidmouth is pretty small in the TV series and really, it's basically like in the Railway series it's the terminus. It's very
Yeah.
important. But in the TV series it's really just relegated to like a random station on Duck's branch line. So it doesn't have as much importance there. Brendan is an interesting idea because I could definitely see like in the TV series, it seems like one of the most important places.
Right.
So it would be really cool. Imagine if Brendan sheds were like like you have Boko, Edward, maybe Bill and Ben sometimes sleep there. That's where Salty sleeps, Porter. Really, maybe Derek.
Yeah.
Like
There are
that would
enough
actually be really cool.
engines that like even though like Salty and Porter are really the only two dedicated Brendam engines, there are enough engines that you see really associated with Brendam that you could have a full like one or two roundhouses full of engines that like their sole purpose is work near Brendam.
Yeah, I mean, you really could. You could have a full roundhouse with them. Donald and Douglas are other engines that might show up there
Yeah.
sometimes because they help on Edward's branch. So it's like that. Yeah, a roundhouse at Brendan actually would be a really cool idea. Which version would you assign to which location then? Like, say for Brendan, which version of the sheds would
So
you
for
use?
Brendam, I like using like the closed shuttered version of the Roundhouse, and same goes for
Interesting.
Vickerstown because I associate Vickerstown sheds, not so much the station, but the sheds as being more run down, and the same goes for
Yeah,
Brendam,
I definitely agree with
because
that.
there's a lot of like I don't know, but I just kind of associate harbors with like rundown warehouses, so that just it feels right for
Especially,
me.
yeah, I definitely agree with you there. It would really fit at Brendam. It's interesting. Vickerstown makes sense too because we see it in Off the Rails, and it like we see the sheds there. Firstly, that's there's actually five berths there, so
Yeah,
that's
it's
actually
actually
the other one that's
accurate.
accurate. Yeah, but also it does look pretty run
Yeah.
down. Like it really doesn't look like it's in as good of shape as the
Yeah.
normal Tidmouth
And based
sheds.
off of the
So that
Railway
that would fit.
series lore, that would make sense because they haven't been used much because, engines go on to Barrow and, they'll often sleep
Yeah.
there. Um,
You know what I would love to do is I would love to one day. I wouldn't. I probably wouldn't do this because you'd have to damage the work sheds permanently. But what I would love to do is take a bunch of work sheds. Like imagine like 9 work sheds, and then you take the doors off of like the back of like 6 of them,
yeah, I see
and the
what you're
doors
getting
off
here.
either end of 3 of
Yeah.
them, and then you make like a big works
Yeah.
complex, and you have like literally like a like lines wide, 3 work sheds deep, and it's just this big works like where you can just do whatever. That would be really really
That
cool. I
that
would
would
love
be
to do
really
that.
cool. Unfortunately, it's not very feasible. But fortunately, there is an item that you can accomplish uh, a similar effect with, and that's actually like the Tomy sheds. Um,
That's true.
uh,
Yeah, those are really good
yeah,
sheds because they've I mean they've actually got like I have I'm not sure how many I have maybe like 3 or 4, but they're really really useful for like especially when what I used to like to do was I would take like the roof of them because the roof separates it's like three
yeah.
pieces you've got the sides and you've got the roof and I would take the roofs and I would go like 4 wide and I would like tape them together or something.
Oh,
And then I would take 2 red side pieces and put them on either
yeah.
end. So you have a super wide shed that you can run like 5 lines
And
through.
and
Um,
another note of potentially ruining an item for something really cool is like if you'd go ahead and you know like glue 2 or 3 roofs together and make a wider
yeah, if you
shed.
wanted to do it permanently, you
And
could. If you had enough of them. The thing is, I think those are less
and
rare than the
that's what I
work
was just
shed.
about to mention is like those items like they're not as rare as the works shed. Um, so
Again, it shows where my mind is, but it's just like if you were to like glue 4 of those side by side and then glue make that like 4 roof piece like 5 times and glue them all back to back and have like a really wide, really long work shed where you have a bunch of lines
yeah.
running through, that would be just awesome.
But of course, we always
I
have
love the idea
custom
of big
work, so
sheds.
we don't really need to
Yeah,
ruin
that's the thing.
items.
Yeah, if I were ever to if I were to ever try and like do this, I would just build it all from scratch
Right.
because the thing about these items with the wooden railway sheds and some of the Tomy sheds is they're pretty simple. Like you could build a lot of these just from cardboard because you just need to build walls and the
Yeah.
roof and really you're good. And so really you could build any combination you really wanted because the items themselves are really simple to replicate. And so really we're in good shape in regard
Yeah.
to that.
I know one of the custom sheds that I built was of the Vickerstown slash railway series Tidmouth sheds. It was meant to represent the sheds in the 3 railway engines. As I built that
Yeah,
out
I
of
always loved that
cardboard
shed.
for long abandoned adaptation of the book. So, and that was a really fun build. Actually, something that not many people might know when looking at it is there's actually like a hole cut in the like the top of the rear wall, uh, right up next to the roof, where I would stick like, you know, those like headlamps that like you can. There's a rubber band that you strap around your head.
Oh,
I fished one
yeah,
up in there to work as the lighting for my one nighttime scene. So,
that's
yeah.
cool.
Um,
It really, in general, what I've seen a lot of people do, like with the work shed, is they'll put like maybe a red light in there or something, or a yellow
yeah.
light, and because the roof is because the doors have little gaps in them, and because the roof is all plastic, you can really see that light. It's very clear,
Right.
and it really
Yeah.
it has a great look to it, especially at a nighttime set. So there's a lot of creative things you can
Yeah.
do with lighting in
And like
regard
if
to
you have any
sheds.
wires sticking out or anything like that, it's easy to, file them through without like being too obvious because it is kind of
Yeah, exactly.
modular in its design.
Yeah, there's a lot of gaps that you could kind of
Yeah.
work with.
Um
Really, I think just because of the simplicity of these items, it really encourages
yeah.
creativity. Like, there's a lot of different ways that you could use them,
Yeah.
and
I
I
know I've
just
seen, people create and what I want to create is like whole complexes of just various types of sheds and they all like they look different yet they meld together in this way that it's like the same designers built all these things but it was just at different
yeah,
points in time.
yeah, exactly. It's like your whole idea of putting all the roundhouses all over the island. It's like they all have five berths. They're all kind of generally the same structure,
Yeah.
but like they all kind of serve different purposes, have different liveries. They're all kind of like they're different but the same. It's
Yeah.
like a cool kind of symmetry to them.
Especially if you just take like the three basic roundhouse designs is like they are with Tidmouth being the most stand out at outstanding of the three. Like the other two are basically you could look at them and think that like, oh, this one design is the same as this one. It's just the windows are closed. you know.
Yeah.
Um. So again, you could like take like the nice, clean looking like single engine shed design shed, and that's one that I would put at like Knapford, maybe even Croven. Well, there's actually already a dedicated Croven's Gate roundhouse, so never mind. Um,
Yeah, I only noticed that recently. It's like because that I always almost call it the firehouse just because I it's so red. But it's like
well,
I
hey, that
that
gives an
that
idea. If you're making like a Sodor Search and Rescue
search and
Center
rescue center.
layout, like
Yeah, you could. Yeah, actually, honestly, that could actually work. It's like you could you could emphasize that, and then you could have you could put like Flynn in there, Bell, because. Like I do really like the Wooden Railway Search and Rescue Center destinations, but something that
it's
I
too small.
really wish
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
because something I really wish they did is the center building
yeah,
that has because that center building is so cool. It's got like three berths that go in the back, two road berths that go in the front when you go up that
yeah,
ramp, and they never built that thing in its entirety, and it's so sad because it's the coolest thing. And so honestly, this could be a good replacement if you didn't want to build that whole section. You could add this on and kind of beef up your search and rescue center layout. So that could actually be really
yeah.
neat.
The fun things we can think of just by talking about these things. Um, so yeah, there's and so as I was just mentioning, like the Croven's Gate, like the deluxe roundhouse has been released in both Tidmouth and Croven's Gate variants, which I'd like because like I can have like my Tidmouth one be like the diesel shed at Tidmouth, and then the Croven's Gate one like add it onto my Steamworks setup or whatever.
That's interesting, like a separate diesel shed.
Yeah,
Like you could even put them. I it's a little bit crazy, but you can put them side by side, like two roundhouses, and then have like a 10 berth situation where it literally like curves all the way around 180
actually, one
degrees.
thing I thought of was that if you had like four roundhouses, like you could like almost
Oh,
orient them so that like the center lines of the turntable all intersected at a crossing, and then like there was like
yeah,
a
really.
circle going like connecting the turntables, and then uh
That honestly reminds me of a lot of American sheds that are like really big shed complexes that like go all the way around the turntable. That would be kind of neat.
Yeah. Now that's just kind of my one, like, oh, how can these destinations interact with each other in an interesting looking way sort of ideas. Um,
Yeah.
I would never put something so crazy in a full on Sodor layout. Um,
Yeah, it's like there's a lot of different ways to kind of approach a layout
yeah.
where it's like varying levels of realism, and that's one of the things which is more like let's see what we can do,
That's
and
one of
not
the
like
things where I'm
okay we
like,
want to
yeah,
represent
I'm
this.
bored. I'm just gonna dirk around with these pieces of track. Ooh.
Yeah,
So the next two sheds I want to mention before we start wrapping things up here is the Ertl and Trackmaster sheds.
yeah, those are both great.
The
The Trackmaster, I gotta say, like I remember when I first got. You mean like the modular Trackmaster
yeah,
shed that like has like that one looks really good. Where
yeah.
it's like it's one of the best things Trackmaster ever made, and it's one of the reasons that that era of Trackmaster is like my favorite out of all of
Yeah.
Tomy and Trackmaster. Like I just love
I
that era.
remember, so I
Um,
used to collect a lot of Geotrack stuff at my great grandmother's because we didn't like the idea of me lugging all of my Thomas Wooden Railway to her house every weekend. So I had a lot of
yeah,
Geotracks. And when I saw that, like, in, like, the Toys R Us catalog or whatever, and I saw that it was, like, an RC Thomas, I was like, Thomas is turning into Geotrack.
yeah, really. It's like because that was the coolest
Yeah.
set. Like I remember I got that for Christmas the year it came out, and it's just like that. That's just such
Yeah.
a neat set.
And due to all of the adapters from Trackmaster to Trackmaster 2.0, from Trackmaster 2.0 to Superstation, from
Yeah,
Superstation to
I
Wooden
see.
Railway, you can use
Yeah,
those sheds on
I
a
see
Wooden
where you're
Railway
going with
layout.
this.
Therefore, they are relevant to this video.
That's the thing. If you really, really wanted to, I mean, the Wooden Railway and Trackmaster engines fit on the same gauge. You could, connect that to a layout
And
like that. That would be
and
really
honestly,
cool
Wooden
because that
Railway
is just
engines fit on all the major brands. They fit on, their own track, obviously. It would be a shame if they didn't. They fit on the Tomy, they
yeah,
fit on the
that's true.
Trackmaster, they fit on the Trackmaster Revolution, they fit on the Take Along and Take and Play track. They fit on the Ertl track, not that that's relevant to anyone. Um,
Yeah, no one uses
yeah.
Ertl track. Most people probably don't use Ertl track at least.
I
I
mean,
never
just
had
because I
any.
have a box of Ertl track doesn't mean I use it. It just
Yeah,
came with
and
the
speaking
shed.
of Ertl, the speaking of Ertl, that shed is just so like the Ertl shed. I never had it
Yeah.
myself,
When
but
I
I
first
would
saw it,
like
I
see it in
saw it in
videos.
Diesel D199's videos, and I thought it was a Tomy item because it was on a Tomy layout.
I saw it. I don't know if anyone remembers the Rail Inspector 3, I think their username was. And they did a video with that shed in it, and it was just the coolest thing. Like when I first saw that, I'm like, I want that shed because it like had three berths. It like and it was like just the little details, like the fact that it was straight across the front, whereas like most sheds that big. Like growing up, I had two main sheds that I would use in Wooden Railway, which were the main roundhouse that was curved, and then another curved shed with like a yellow top and like a black base
Yeah.
plate, and it had three berths that went in. I had one of those too, but I never had a three berth shed that was all straight across the front,
Yeah.
and I loved that look. And so it's like when I first saw that, I'm like, I want that. One day I would love to have it because I still have not obtained it, but one day I would love to have that red Ertl
Yeah.
shed because it's
I
just
was
the
I
neatest
was
looking
really
thing.
happy when I found that in like a box of Ertl track for like $8 at a flea market. So,
Yeah, that sounds like a dream.
um
That's so
so
cool.
yeah, and I commonly use that as like a either a branch line or a goods yard shed where it's like, okay, this is where either the Farquhar boys or like some of the shunters would, sit and sleep. Uh,
Yeah,
you know.
it's like it's interesting that there's something about sheds that are just have like flat fronts that have more than two lines going into them that I just really think is so
Yeah.
cool. Like there are some sheds in Barrow and Furness. I mean, they're not open anymore, but in the late days of BR, they were, where they had these like it was like ten berths, and it was like this big shed that went straight back. It housed like 60 engines at a
Wow.
time. So this amazing, really massive shed
See,
complex. It was
that's
the
actually an
coolest thing.
interesting concept that I try to avoid with sheds is like sticking multiple engines in the same berth. I don't much like
Yeah,
that.
that
Because I feel
the
like,
thing is, I don't like it either. But I've realized that that's what they do in real life a
yeah,
lot.
I didn't know if
They
they do that in
basically
real life or not, which is because I always feel like, well, what if they need the engine behind this engine?
And I think it's just that they put them in the order that like they'll be needed.
Right.
So it's like say like the Skarloey Railway does this too, where they
Yeah.
like kind of back them all into the shed. And
I've always
it's
kind
like
of
if you
forgiven
need
that
Sir
because I've
Handel for
always seen
first...
the shed as like it goes out both ways, like it runs straight through.
That's
So,
true. Yeah, in the Railway series, that's how it is. Is that there's actually believe it or not, there's a turntable behind the Skarloey Railway sheds in the Railway
yeah,
series.
I found that
Um,
surprising.
and that's really weird because I didn't know that for years
Like,
until I saw it
what
mapped
use
out.
does a narrow gauge engine have for a turntable? They're so tiny. Can't they just?
Yeah, but then again, you never see them going backwards, do you? So I guess they always turn them around. I mean, it's really interesting. I wouldn't expect
Yeah.
that.
Oh, and one last shed I want to mention because it's a shed that I own, and I did kind of like talk about it just a tiny bit. Was the interactive learning railway shed?
Oh, I love the interactive learning
Yeah.
railway. That's like that was such a cool range. Like it popped up just briefly,
Yeah.
and then it was like
It's
gone
like
in
the
a
best
flash.
of take along / take and play and the best of wooden railway, and they mashed it together for 5 seconds, and we're like, oh wait, we've created something too beautiful. Separate it quick.
Yeah, I really do love that range.
And I got
I
that
have a
shed,
Percy
and that
a
was my
Gordon from
only
it.
shed for a long time until I got the Deluxe Roundhouse.
Yeah, that's interesting. That is a cool shed.
Yeah.
It's like, I really like when sheds have like a really big, like Wooden Railway did this a lot where there's like a destination will have like kind of a wooden base plate that will have the tracks carved in. And that does that, but kind of with plastic.
Yeah.
Where it's like, it's got the tracks running out of it, and you've got kind of a base plate that goes for a ways in front of the shed. That's
Yeah.
pretty neat.
And
I do
there's
like
there's
that
so
shed.
much like stuff like going on in the back of the shed with like, it has like a coal hopper and a paint station and like a oil can to like oil up gears or whatever, that I kind of put that like at my works. I kind of use it as the works shed. So like when I set up a layout, I usually set up Victor in one of the berths, and and it kind of just set it off to the side.
Yeah, that's a cool
you
idea.
know so yeah, that's a nice shed that it has a lot of nostalgia for me. Mine's in terrible condition. The two like walls on the side have like been mangled. Somehow it still holds itself up. I'm not sure how. But like,
It's got a lot of willpower.
it's been well loved. We'll put
Yes,
that
that's
way.
a good perspective.
But yeah, I think we've said enough about sheds.
Yeah, I think we've said
Yeah.
our piece here.
2 times actually. So I think that's going to wrap up this episode of Trackplan Banter. Thank you, Lemmy, for coming here and doing this with
Oh
me.
yeah, absolutely. I've had a lot of fun having this intense shed discussion.
Yes, very intense. So yeah, thanks for coming on. Hope to maybe have you on again.
Yeah, definitely.
I think that's about it. So this has been Rudy Productions, aka Dustin,
And MasterOfTheLemons, aka Lemmy.
and we'll see y'all next time.
Thanks for having me on. See you, everybody.